This is my review of the Sony Alpha 1 Mark II, although to be fair, it's probably going to be a little bit more of a rant. Because if you know anything about me or this channel, you know this is should be a very exciting launch for me. I have been a huge fan of the original Alpha 1 since it came out. I, at one point, switched all my cameras to Alpha 1s. I still use it for all my lens tests. I've compared it favorably against cinema cameras. I talk about the Alpha 1 a lot. I love it. I think it's a fantastic camera. But just because I don't think this is as exciting of a launch as it could be or should be for me, doesn't mean there's anything wrong with this camera. In fact, the Alpha 1 Mark II is definitely Sony's best camera. It's damn near perfect. And so on that note, when it comes to hybrid cameras, it's probably personally my favorite camera of all time, the Alpha 1 Mark II. But because of the Alpha 1, and because of the way Sony releases cameras, and the cameras that come afterwards, and the way they trickle software into other ones, and how they treat firmware updates, and the firmware updates that were for the Alpha 1, because of all this, it's hard for me just to look at the Alpha 1 Mark II just as a camera in a vacuum and say how good it is. I would like to take you on a journey of my swirling mind about how I feel about this launch. But before that, I should provide some disclosure. Sony did lend me this camera to make this review. I don't get to keep it. No money changed hands. Sony doesn't get any input on this video's production, nor do they get to see it before it's posted. This video does have an actual sponsor though, and that's Angelbird and the new AV Pro CF Express A cards and PKT reader. Okay, first of all, the sensor. It is the same sensor as the original Alpha 1. So same resolution. I tested the dynamic range. I busted out the Xyla 21. Same results for dynamic range. I tested the rolling shutter. Same results for rolling shutter. Now, there are some other components that have been added into this camera. For instance, it has the AI processing chip. So I have no problem with this camera now having the more advanced subject detection. And it even has the auto mode, the auto switching mode, which is great. So you don't just have to go in and switch it to people, then go in and switch it to animals. You can just put on auto, and it is very good at detecting that's a cat, that's a person, that's a plane, that's a train. And it can track all these things. It does really well. There's different boxes now, and it doesn't just track eyes, it tracks pose estimation and everything. It's great. We've talked about this a lot when we talked about the A7R5, when they first, I think that's when they first launched the AI processing unit. It's great. And it makes this camera autofocus much better than the Alpha 1. So that's good. Also, it has a new IBIS module, which again is hardware. So the module is better and improved. And apparently it's rated for 8.5 stops instead of the 5.5 on the Mark 1. And I have some test footage here to share with you where, in walking tests, in standard, I didn't notice a huge difference between the Alpha 1 Mark II and the Alpha 1 despite it having 3 more stops. But when we get to active, it definitely seems to have an improvement, especially you can see in the walking quickly and then in the jogging after in the tracking shot, the active on the Mark II is significantly better in video than the Mark 1. So in video, that is an improvement. If you're just doing minor stabilization stuff, I think that the Mark 1 is still probably sufficient. And I also did some long focal length static handheld stuff on active to see if there was a big difference. And again, yeah, at 400mm with active stabilization on, the Mark II did seem to have fewer of those jerk corrections than the Mark 1 did. So overall, I don't know how to quantify it, but yes, the stabilization in active mode is better. And there are more modes now. Now you have the dynamic active stabilization, which we talked about again in the last few Sony cameras as well, which is better. They also have that framing stabilizer. So if you're willing to crop in quite a bit, you can have it sort of stabilize the portion of the frame that the person's in and then use a lot more real estate to keep them super smooth. And with that, they also have the auto framing function. So if you want to film yourself, all those new like vloggy features like soft skin effect, and basically you can put yourself in front of the camera and walk back and forth and it'll crop in and follow you. It has all that stuff that we saw on like the ZV cameras and that kind of thing. And so that's all been included. And a lot of that is hardware based. So I don't really have any complaints when it comes to that being included on this camera and not on the original Alpha 1, because this camera also apparently has an improved processor. So, maybe that necessitates some of those more advanced, AI features and stuff like that. And then physically, this is using the new chassis design that we saw with the A9 Mark III, which is Sony's best. And like I mentioned in my A9 Mark III review, that means you get, a better contour here where the shutter button is, a little bit of a better grip. You get deeper, more pronounced custom buttons on the top. It's got a new function button on the front here, which is normally used for that speed boost function that we'll get into. And then most importantly, it has the new 15-axis flippy dippy multi-way everything screen that I absolutely adore. And this is probably the biggest thing that makes me want to buy it over the original Alpha 1. Primarily it's for this reason. So if you guys haven't seen this screen yet, basically it's the same type of screen that you have on the Alpha 1 where you can, bring it out and tilt it like this, but it also is a fully articulating screen as well that rotates, and you can do both at the same time. Hell, if you were shooting portrait vertical video for, TikTok or whatever, you could actually flip this screen up. You could do this and then rotate it like that, and you can kind of almost see sort of like a, you know, a vertical version of yourself sticking up over the camera. Like it's every angle's possible. But the main one for me is that if ever I want to shoot low portrait stuff on the Alpha 1, I always ran into this problem where once you get low, there's no real position to put the screen on where you can see it. So I wish I had a flip out screen. But when I'm behind the camera, I don't actually like having a flip out screen. I like having the screen right behind the camera like this where I can look down on it. Well, with this screen, you can do both. You want to shoot low angles? There you go. You want to be behind the camera? You can just go like this. It's great. It's thin. It's a terrific screen. It's the best screen mechanism that there is. One thing to consider though is that because this is basically an A9 III body and not an Alpha 1 body, the grip that you're going to need for this camera if you want to use an extra battery grip would be the A9 III's grip and not the Alpha 1's grip. So the old grip is not going to be compatible anymore. Other than that, everything is pretty much the same in terms of what you're used to. Same batteries, same card slots, and pretty much all the same ports, although they did improve the Ethernet port on this one to be a 2.5 gig port instead of the typical 1 gig port. And speaking of those card slots, if you want to get yourself the best possible storage media for this camera, you have to see the new products from the sponsor of today's video, Angelbird. Firstly, they've got a new line of AV Pro CF Express cards that come in 3 ideal sizes. They're all certified to VPG 400, making these cards the best combination of speed, capacity, and price available in my opinion. And they're all made up to Angelbird's incredible quality and reliability standards. They're finely crafted by a dedicated team of storage engineers that oversee every step of design, engineering, assembly, and testing. And it really shows with the new card reader too, the PKT. These are available in SD and CF Express B as well, but I have the CFA version here. These are by far my new favorite card readers because they're a whole lot more than just that. The fit and finish of the product is fantastic, and even the included cord is one of the nicest I've seen. It's durable, flexible, braided, and delivers up to 20 gigabits per second. But it's also removable, and the recess that remains allows you to connect other USB-C cables or Thunderbolt. It even perfectly fits my purple Condor Blue cables. It's flush fit and won't come out accidentally or on an angle, so you never have to worry about your reader sliding off, disconnecting, or canceling or corrupting your transfer. And speaking of corruption prevention, they have a read-only switch to prevent your system from loading unnecessary files to your card when you connect it, which will drastically reduce the likelihood of card corruption. And it even prevents you from accidentally deleting files off your card when in that mode. But you can also switch it to write mode, put on the included cap, and now you have a portable drive that's designed to work with pretty much every camera that offers external USB recording. And the PKT can be firmware updated easily to ensure you'll always have compatibility with the latest cameras if you want to use it that way, which gets even more value and life out of your CF Express cards, as now they can double as external camera media or a portable storage solution. Angelbird knocked it out of the park with this launch, and I recommend you check them out using the link in the description. There's also a couple things included in the box with the Mark II that you don't get with the Mark I, which is you get their new dual bay battery charger, operates on USB-C, and you can charge like 2 batteries really quickly with this thing, so that's cool. And then also, this is the original EVF eye cup, which is included, but then they also include this one in the box, which is, you know, just a bit thicker and a little bit more comfortable in the eye. So you have those options. I actually like the new bigger one that's included in the box, so that's nice. Now, those smaller features, and some of these are more contentious because they're like, could they not have just been added in firmware? First of all, pre-capture. This camera now offers pre-capture up to 1 second, meaning that you can set it so that even if you were a second late on pressing the shutter button, you can still get those photos from up to a second before. So that's sweet. Now, when I talk about these features, by the way, I'm comparing it to the Alpha 1, assuming that you have the latest firmware on the Alpha 1, meaning the one that had brought focus breathing compensation and the 4K 30 webcam and stuff like that. These are the features that are still in addition to the latest firmware that you will find on the Alpha 1 Mark II. Speed boost, which was, I think we first saw that on the A9 Mark III. So you can set it to this function button on the front, but basically you could be shooting at 1 frame rate, maybe 10 frames a second, and then you could set speed boost to go all the way up to that 30 frames a second. It's not as significant as it is on the A9 III, where that speed boost can be set to go all the way up to like 120 frames per second, but it's still cool to have it if you want just sort of a quick little burst without shooting so many frames the rest of the time. And then like we already talked about, auto framing, framing stabilizer, dynamic active, soft skin, all the vloggy features, if you want to call them that, they're all included here. They're not on the Alpha 1. Maybe they require that extra hardware like we talked about. User LUTs, however, is on here and is not on that camera, and definitely don't require special hardware to get user LUTs. There's no excuse why we didn't get user LUTs in the firmware update over there. There's a new function similar with that, you know, multi-shot pixel image consolidation thing. They're calling it NR shooting, which is basically you can shoot 4 to 32 raw images and then consolidate them using Imaging Edge to basically remove the noise from your photo. It's going to like noise average using the different images and then like lower the noise dramatically. So that's called NR shooting, and that's available on here. There's a bulb timer that's been added to this camera if that's something that's useful to you, as well as full-time DMF. There are more refined autofocus settings in this, especially when it comes to speed change and stuff like that. There's some better autofocus, more refined controls, which is nice. Focus bracketing. When I was doing the review of those macro lenses recently, I didn't realize that my Alpha 1 didn't have focus bracketing, and I had to switch to a cheaper, newer Sony camera just to test the focus bracketing. And I was like, how does it not have that? This one has the focus bracketing, of course it does, and this one still doesn't have it. Log shooting mode for video, which is that whole interface where instead of setting your picture profile to log, it's like in image quality, you just turn on log shooting mode. It still has an issue with it though, even all the way up to this camera, and it's still not in the original Alpha 1, but that's in here now. They also have the 1/48th of a second shutter that they started releasing recently. So if you're shooting at 24p, you can set your shutter speed to exactly, 1/48th. Again, that could have been added with firmware to the original Alpha 1. It's also going to be $6,500 US, the same price that the original Alpha 1 was, but I assume the Alpha 1 price is going to go down when this one came out. And it's possible this one could be $100 to $200 less than that $6,500, but it'll be somewhere in that ballpark. And so the big question of this video is going to be, how much is everything I just said worth in a dollar amount if you're an existing Alpha 1 user? If you don't have an Alpha 1, say maybe you're an A7 IV user and you were thinking about something like the Alpha 1, but there were some things that were missing and you weren't sure if you wanted to commit to the money. Well, now here you go. Get the Alpha 1 Mark II. It's got everything. It's, like I said, everything Sony's ever come up with, it's in here and it does it well. And for things that it didn't change, like the video performance, it didn't need to, because the video performance in the Alpha 1 is probably still like Sony's best, and a lot of the photography related stuff is still Sony's best. When I said the dynamic range is the same earlier on, this is still one of Sony's best video dynamic range cameras 3 years later. So they didn't really need to improve it. It's still their number one, right? So you're still getting all that, but now you're getting all the features and from every line, from the ZV line, from the R line, from the A9 line, like everything is in here. So it's a no-brainer. It's going to be the same price. Just buy this. It gets more complicated once you see the used market for these, once this comes out, and then that's when you have to ask the question of how much more money better is this camera? And that is really tricky. I can tell you some things from a user's perspective who's been using the Alpha 1 for a long time of how much value I feel like this new camera would add to me. But take this with a grain of salt. The new screen, I would pay, like if I could just somehow, if I could send this camera into Sony and get this screen added to that, how much would I pay for that? I would pay quite a bit, like up to $1,000, honestly. Like that's how much better, once you've used one of these new, 10-way flippy screens, I would say up to $1,000. Add in the other things, the subject detection AI processing chip, the better ergonomics and stuff. If you told me that you would want to spend $1,500, $2,000 more, I wouldn't argue with you. I'd say that seems reasonable. $4,000 more seems like a stretch to kind of set a perspective there. So let's say you have an Alpha 1 and you can sell it on the used market for $4,000, $4,500, and then you're going to take that money and buy an Alpha 1 Mark II. I think you did okay. If you can only get $3,000 for that thing and you got to spend another $35,000 over here, I don't know that you're going to appreciate $3,500 improvement. I really don't. And obviously this is going to be completely subjective to you. But if you can turn in your Alpha 1 plus $1,500 and get an Alpha 1 Mark II, I think that was a good deal. But now let's talk a little bit more to those users who are considering buying an Alpha 1 Mark II from zero. Like they don't have an Alpha 1 already. And also, so to give my official take on the people that have been asking me, Gerald, what do you think of all the Sony firmware stuff? And what do you think about, now that there's firmware updates for the Alpha 1 and about how Sony releases cameras? Let's talk about all that. If you've been watching my videos for a while, you know that I actually have been complaining for a long time to Sony about the firmware for cameras like the A7S III and the Alpha 1. When focus breathing compensation first came out, I complained over and over again saying, when are we going to focus breathing compensation? Or here's one that still is missing that we didn't touch on the Alpha 1. In video, you still can't track animal eye. You can do it in photo, but not in video. But the A7 IV, which I'm shooting this video on, does have animal eye detection in video. It doesn't have an AI processing chip, It doesn't have, anything fancy hardware-wise. It just has it. But they never put it on the Alpha 1. But the Alpha 1 is the flagship. But how can the flagship not have a feature as simple as that you think would be pretty important to the different types of customers that would be using the Alpha 1? And there's a lot of examples of that. But this brings us to the point of buying a product for what it is today. If you are to buy the Alpha 1 Mark II, right now it has everything that Sony has. So that's great. But you should probably be aware that next year, I don't have any information on this, I'm just speculating. Next year there's going to be, an A7 IV or something like that. And the A7 V might be sort of a little brother to the Alpha 1 Mark II. And it might inherit a lot of the things that this camera has. It'll be significantly cheaper, probably less than half the price. This is me based on how the A7 IV was to the Alpha 1. And they'll probably add some new thing in it that we didn't think of at the time of this video. Who knows what it is? And it might be something cool. And you know what? This flagship Alpha 1 Mark II isn't going to have it. And historically, if we look at how Sony handled the Alpha 1, it's probably not going to have it for 3 years, if it even gets it. And when it does, it might mess up your Wi-Fi on your camera or something when you do update that firmware. Now, I'm not saying people can't improve from what they did historically, but until we see a track record of Sony keeping a flagship up to date more frequently, it's best to assume that that's what's going to happen. Now, does that mean that Sony is wrong or doing something wrong? I don't think it necessarily does. I think as consumers, we need to always be buying the product for what it is today, not for some promise of the future, especially when something costs $6,500. You better think that this camera is the answer as it is, because that's a big investment. Sony has a weird way of releasing cameras that is pretty sweet for one type of consumer, which is that if you're somebody who's on the budget end and you're waiting for the trickle down, you actually get a pretty sweet thing. You'll get the, eventually it'll be what was the latest one? It was like a ZV-E10 Mark II. Eventually it'll work its way down to a $1,000 camera that'll have all the stuff that a flagship had a couple years ago. Actually, that $1,000 camera has a bunch of stuff that the flagship doesn't have. So that's cool. If you're somebody who's got $1,000, you could just wait and then you'll get a lot of those features. It's annoying if you're the person who spends $6,500 and you still don't have those features. You should be aware that if you buy this camera, a year from now, you're going to be frustrated when a, $1,000 camera comes out that can do a whole bunch of stuff that this camera can do and add something that your camera can't do. Don't be frustrated, I guess. Be happy that the camera that you bought was excellent. Is that what we're supposed to be doing? Sony, this is an incredible camera. But please, next year, when you make an A7 V or whatever you make and you add a new function into the A7 V, at the time that you announce that, also announce a firmware update for this camera to get that same feature. Please. That's the only way you can keep both sets of customers happy. And you want your flagship customers to remain happy so that when you release an Alpha 1 Mark II, they're not making videos like this. And they're not debating whether or not they should just wait for an A7 V for half the price that probably has all these features and something else. You can fix that, Sony. That's what you can do. And while you're on the fixing that train, I have two complaints, two issues that still need to be fixed. And I've been complaining about these for a while, but I kind of let it slide the last couple of videos. But we're bringing them back up since we're talking about firmware and stuff. One is log shooting and HDMI, and the other one is H.265. I've talked about these a lot. I've never gotten an answer. The first one, maybe the more minor one, is you've been putting log shooting mode into your cameras, the last, half a dozen cameras, which is cool. I like it. I like that you can use user LUTs. Alpha 1 Mark II's got user LUTs. You can preview the LUT, turn it off and on. The log shooting menu is very, slick and succinct compared to the picture profile menu. I think it's great. However, when you enable log shooting mode, you can no longer output 4K over HDMI, inexplicably. You can go into picture profile and create a log picture profile, and then you can output 4K over HDMI. But whenever you enable log shooting mode, no 4K over HDMI. It doesn't make any sense. Some bad line of code somewhere in the OS. Please fix it, please. It's been a couple years now. The second thing, which is arguably even more atrocious, because it's been going on for longer and it's a bigger deal, it's been going on since the A7S III, these cameras offer an H.265 recording mode, which is more efficient and a better use of card space, obviously. However, you cannot shoot 30 frames a second when an NTSC in H.265, and more problematic, if you're a PAL shooter, you can't shoot 25p when shooting H.265. H.264, you have them all, 24, 30, 60, 120, or 25, 50, 100 for PAL. But as soon as you switch to H.265, you just skip one. It goes 24, 60, 120. If you can do 60, you can do 30. If you can do 50 and 100 in PAL, you can do 25. Now, I get that because you haven't fixed it in the last 10 cameras, and I've been complaining about it in every briefing and at every, meeting with the engineers, and I'm sure other people have as well. Probably deep in the operating system somewhere is some piece of code that prevents that from being an easy fix, and you're trying to figure out a way to do it without overhauling everything. Fix it. You gotta find a way to fix it. It's more important to service your cameras than it is to make so many cameras. You already have so many segments and so many models with each one, and you're like the only brand that releases 20 cameras a year that each one somehow cannibalizes the previous one. And I applaud you for that, because other brands are too afraid to, put too many features in a new camera because they don't want to make the other camera obsolete. Sony's just like, we'll make everything obsolete. We don't care. This camera's $200 and it does everything the flagship can do. That's great. But then also go back and address these other issues. I'm done telling you about the issues. Fix them. Is that the end of the rant? Is the Alpha 1 Mark II any good? Was that the question of this video? Yes, it's better. It's Sony's best camera. It's as far as Sony cameras go, as far as everything I've come to know about what makes a Sony camera, this thing's damn near perfect. So good job in that regard. Let's just keep it perfect by keeping it up to date without bricking other features if we can. Okay? All right. I'm done.